Generation X includes people born between 1965 and 1980. They grew up in a world that was changing very quickly. This generation is smaller than the baby boomers before them, and the millennials after them. Sometimes they are called the forgotten middle child generation. Their experiences were very different from their parents' generation. They were the first generation to grow up with new family structures and less adult supervision than ever before. This unique upbringing shaped their personalities and their view of the world in profound and lasting ways, creating a distinct generational identity. Family life for Gen X was not the same as it was for the baby boomers. Divorce rates became much higher during their childhood years. Many Gen X kids were part of the first generation where divorce was common. This meant they often lived in single-parent homes or split their time between two different households. At the same time, more mothers began working outside the home. This was a big economic and social change. Families needed two incomes to get by, and women sought careers more than ever before, which fundamentally altered the traditional family model. These changes led to a new kind of childhood. With fewer adults at home, many Gen X kids became latchkey kids. They would come home from school to an empty house. They had a key to let themselves in, and had to take care of themselves for a few hours until a parent came home from work. This experience taught them to be very independent from a young age. They learned how to make their own snacks, do their homework without help, and entertain themselves. This independence became a core part of their identity, and a skill they would rely on throughout their lives. This newfound freedom had both good and bad sides. On one hand, it made Gen Xers incredibly self-reliant and resourceful. They were not used to having adults solve all their problems for them. They learned by doing and by making their own mistakes. On the other hand, this lack of supervision sometimes led to a feeling of being overlooked or ignored. They learned early on that they could not always count on institutions or even adults to be there for them. This created a healthy skepticism that would influence how they approached work, family, and society as adults, making them cautious but also highly capable. The economic world that Generation X entered was full of challenges. They grew up hearing about recessions in the 1970s and 1980s. These economic downturns made job security seem like a thing of the past. They saw their parents worry about layoffs and financial instability. Unlike the boomers, who often expected to have a job for life with one company, Gen X learned that the economy was unpredictable. This early exposure to economic uncertainty taught them not to take financial stability for granted and to be prepared for sudden changes in the job market, a lesson that would prove invaluable. As they grew older and started thinking about careers, the costs of higher education were rising dramatically. College became much more expensive than it had been for their parents' generation. This meant that many Gen Xers were the first to graduate with significant student loan debt. Starting their adult lives with thousands of dollars in debt was a major burden. It affected their ability to buy homes, start families, and save for the future. This financial pressure shaped their career choices, often pushing them toward practical fields rather than following their passions without considering the financial consequences. The political landscape was also filled with distrust and major global shifts. Many Gen Xers were young children or teenagers during the Watergate scandal. They saw a president resign in disgrace, which taught them to be cynical about political leaders and government institutions. They learned not to blindly trust authority figures. Later, they watched the final years of the Cold War and witnessed the surprising fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. These events showed them that the world order they had always known could change in an instant, reinforcing their adaptable mindset. Social issues also defined their formative years. The AIDS epidemic emerged as a terrifying public health crisis in the 1980s. It brought fear and uncertainty, but it also forced important conversations about health, safety, and compassion. In schools, Gen X was one of the first generations to experience widespread desegregation efforts. They attended schools with greater racial and ethnic diversity than ever before. This experience of learning alongside students from different backgrounds gave them a more inclusive worldview than previous generations, preparing them for an increasingly multicultural society. Generation X was the last generation to remember life before the internet, but the first to truly grow up with personal computers. The arrival of the Apple II and the IBM PC in homes and schools was revolutionary. They learned to type on keyboards and use floppy disks. This early exposure to technology gave them a unique bridge-like position. They were comfortable with analog technology like VCRs and cassette tapes, but they also adapted easily to the digital world as it emerged. This technological fluency became a major advantage in their careers and personal lives. Music and television also had a huge impact, largely thanks to one cable channel, MTV. Launched in 1981, MTV changed everything about youth culture. It brought music videos into living rooms 24 hours a day. For the first time, music was not just something you heard on the radio, it was something you watched. This created a new connection between artists and their fans. Gen X culture was heavily shaped by the music and fashion they saw on MTV, from new wave and punk to grunge and hip-hop. This visual medium defined their style and their attitudes. If you like this content, make sure to like, subscribe, and poke that notification bell so you never miss an update. Video games were another defining part of their childhood. Arcades were popular social hubs where kids gathered to play games like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong. Then, home video game consoles like the Atari 2600 and the Nintendo Entertainment System brought the arcade experience home. These games provided hours of entertainment and were a new way for kids to socialize and compete with each other. For a generation often left to their own devices, video games were an important part of their social and recreational lives, fostering problem-solving skills and a new form of digital literacy. The early internet also began to take shape during their young adulthood. They were the pioneers of the digital frontier, using dial-up modems to connect to bulletin board systems and early online services like America Online. They were the first to use email, instant messaging, and online chat rooms to connect with people. While the internet was slow and clumsy back then, it offered a glimpse of a more connected future. This early adoption of online communication set the stage for the social media revolution that would be fully embraced by the millennial generation that followed them. Because of their skepticism and detached cool, Generation X was often stereotyped as slackers in the 1990s. Media portrayed them as cynical, unmotivated, and uninterested in climbing the corporate ladder like their boomer predecessors. Movies and music from the era often highlighted this sense of disillusionment. They were seen as a generation that would rather work a low-stress job at a coffee shop than commit to a demanding career. This stereotype, however, missed the bigger picture of what was really going on with this generation and their unique approach to life and work. This slacker label was really a misunderstanding of their core traits, independence and adaptability. Gen X wasn't lazy, they were just cautious. Having seen their parents lose jobs and their government leaders fail them, they were wary of traditional paths to success. They valued work-life balance long before it became a popular buzzword. They preferred to rely on themselves, rather than on unstable companies or institutions. Their independence was a survival skill they had learned as latchkey kids, and they applied it to their careers and adult lives with practical determination. In reality, Generation X turned out to be incredibly resilient and innovative. They entered the workforce during a period of rapid technological change and economic restructuring. They adapted to the rise of the internet and became key leaders in the tech industry. They navigated multiple recessions and learned to be flexible in their careers, often changing jobs or even industries to find stability and fulfillment. Their pragmatism and ability to handle change without panic made them valuable employees and steady leaders in a constantly shifting world, proving their early critics wrong. In conclusion, Generation X's identity was forged in a unique crucible of social, economic, and technological change. They were the independent latchkey kids who grew up with divorce and working mothers. They faced economic uncertainty and political cynicism from a young age. They embraced new technologies like computers, MTV, and the early internet. While they were once dismissed as slackers, their experiences cultivated independence, adaptability, and resilience. They are the bridge generation, connecting the analog past to the digital future, and their quiet influence continues to shape the world in countless ways. If you like this content, make sure to like, subscribe, and poke that notification bell at the end of the video.